Welcome back, everyone. Look, there is no hiding my excitement over today. Today feels special. You have put in a lot of hard work if you are ready to solder. And for some reason, I have a feeling that if you clicked on this video, that's exactly what you're preparing to do. So I just want to give you a round of applause for all the hard work you have put in. It's not easy, but it's so worth it. And I'm so excited because today's the day we are going to bring all that hard work together. There's a lot to cover today, and you probably are feeling some anxiety over this particular step. Trust me, I completely understand that. It's actually a good thing because that means you're going to go into this with a little bit more mindfulness, and hopefully after you watch my video today, you're going to go into it with a lot more confidence. We're going to go over safety. We're going to go over how to stabilize your project, how to solder front and back, how to attach wire so that you can hang your piece, how to bead the edge or edge solder your piece, also how to clean and polish it. So we better get started, you guys. Safety time. Before you step up to the soldering station, be sure that you're wearing the proper attire. I recommend long pants, long sleeve shirt, clothes that are fitted to your body, socks and shoes, at the very least socks. If you have children or pets, please secure them elsewhere because there's just too much going on here. Your cord to your soldering iron is very vulnerable to short people and fur babies. So you don't want this getting thrown out of your holder onto one of them or onto you or onto your floor. This thing is hot, y'all. Now you'll also experience the occasional solder bead that wants to run right off your table onto your foot or your leg. You'll also occasionally experience a little bit of spatter, especially while you're learning. That's why it's so important to make sure your body's covered. I like these Dex Fit rubberized gloves for soldering. They're super comfortable and breathable. I can wear these for a really long time and they're comfortable. I really like them and they're cheap. You know how I feel about these. If you're not wearing these, you're just not being smart. Always wear safety glasses when you're working with stained glass anything. Now, some of you watching this video are going to expect me to wear a ventilation mask. Now, I'm not gonna do that. However, if that is what makes you feel safe and comfortable and confident, by all means, do it. Now, if it's a beautiful day, if it's nice out, open your windows. Even if it's a little cold, it's nice to open your windows. Obviously, it's not cold right now, it's September, but do it. Open those windows. If you want to bring in a air purifier in addition to your fume extractor, then do it. It's a great idea. Now don't forget to actually turn on your fume extractor. All right, friends, without further ado, let's solder this little pumpkin. Since I'm right-handed, I have my soldering iron and my stand to the right of me. This is what I use to clean the tip of my iron occasionally as I'm working. It's just a brass sponge stuffed into a little contraption, and you just poke your iron into it a few times and it cleans the tip of your iron for you. Some people use a wet sponge to do this, but I actually really like this little gadget. Of course, you'll need your spool of solder nearby. Now, directly behind the work, I like to place my fume extractor. It pulls the smoke away from me, and by being back there, it's close enough to really grab the smoke before it has time to dissipate into the air. Now, my flux and my flux brush, I like to keep over on the left side. This is just my personal preference. And then obviously my work is in the center. Now, what you see here are the pins I use to stabilize the project. And you can see it was placed right along the piece of glass. Now, when I'm doing little projects like this, I don't typically use the pins, but I wanted to show you what this looks like. And it really does keep the project from shifting around while you're attaching it together with solder. And this is a heat-resistant cork board that I am working on today. I plugged in my soldering iron and it is set to 410 degrees. That's a little hot, but that just seems to be the sweet spot for me, but feel free to play around with that. First, I'm gonna brush just a little bit of flux onto some of the seams of the project. Flux is what is gonna help the solder stick to the foil. And I'm just doing it in these couple of spots first so that I can tack my piece together. Now I'm gonna clean the tip of my iron by pressing into this brass sponge a few times. Now unspool several inches of solder, and you can choose if you want to hold the spool in your non-dominant hand or just have it sitting close by for easy access. I'm using 60-40 can-filled solder. Now I'm going to tack the project together with small dots of solder where I applied the flux earlier. This is going to lock the whole piece together so nothing moves around. The way you pick up solder is by using the bottom of your iron. It's super easy. You just snatch a little bit up and move it carefully to your project and just set it down. Just rest it on the copper. If your solder bead won't hang on to the iron, you may have your iron a little too hot. Once you've tacked your piece together, you can remove the pins and brush just a little thin layer of flux on the remaining copper foil seams. So once you've done this, you're going to be able to start running full solder lines. When working with liquid flux, it's important not to use too much because it's prone to spatter. So start with a little and you can always add more. Some people prefer gel flux or paste flux. Feel free to try all of the above. There are several different correct methods of running a solder bead, and I'm going to show you a few different ones that I've used. When applying solder, you're going to want to hold your iron at about a 45-degree angle to the glass. And don't scrape your iron along the copper foil. It is so not necessary. Don't feel like you need to scribble your iron or do brush strokes. Just use a smooth, slow, continuous motion and drag the solder along, allowing everything to melt into one smooth bead. When I first began soldering, I felt more comfortable applying a thin amount of solder to the whole project and then going back and running a thicker rounded bead to finish. But now I just add more solder from the start. Sometimes I like to drop little beads of solder along the lines and then go back and connect them. Once you've spread the solder, you can then determine if you need to add more to an area or if you need to carry some of the excess over to another joint. And if you do this method, just make sure that you allow the iron to linger long enough to melt each bead fully so it flows into the next and so forth. This is just something you can play around with and see how it feels. Now, if I'm soldering a particularly long line, I may opt for the continuous feeding method. I'm not particularly good at this, but it's when you feed the solder directly on like a higher part of the soldering iron tip and you allow it to just puddle up underneath. And as it's puddling, you just drag the solder along the seam. Now we're going to tin the outer edge. This just means that you're going to apply a tiny amount of solder to the exposed copper edge. Most of the time there's enough solder already on the tip of your iron, but all you're doing in this step is making the copper look silver. Now we're going to carefully flip our project over and repeat what we just did on the back side, except you don't have to do that tacking step. Now you can just put a very thin layer of flux all over the seams, all over where the copper foil is. On the small projects like this, you can kind of go ahead and flux the whole thing. Now, if it was a big project, you would want to work in sections. You're going to want to clean the tip of your soldering iron periodically while you're working on a project because impurities will build up on the tip of your iron, and this will affect the heat. It'll affect the flow of the solder. So if you notice your solder is looking lumpy or it's just not flowing good, there's a good chance that you need to clean the tip of your iron or you need to add flux. You may even need to do both. You may notice when I get to the top of these outer seams that I'm stopping a little bit short there, and that's because I'm going to be attaching wire loops to each side, so I'm leaving a little naked space. So when you are running a bead along a line and you get close to the edge, it's really important not to allow your iron to go off of that edge because that's going to cause the solder to just spill over the side and you're going to lose your bead altogether. So make sure that you're lifting up on your iron just before you get to the end to prevent it from spilling over. Your goal is to end up with these rounded, shiny, continuous beads. So if your solder looks really flat or you can still see the seam between the two pieces, then you definitely need to go back and add more solder. Never linger too long in one spot. This can cause your solder to melt through to the other side, or worse, your glass to crack. So just keep things moving along. You can always let it cool and come back to that problem area. If your piece is going to hang, you'll want to attach sturdy wire loops. And so it's important to find the balance point or points near the top center, or if you're using 2 points equally spaced apart so that your project hangs correctly. So I've already cut my wire to the length that I need it, and I even went ahead and shaped it in the way that I'm going to need it to be shaped. I tinned the ends of the wire to make sure everything adheres well. Apply flux to the wire and to the area where you're going to be attaching the wire. Flux is super important for this step because you need to create a nice smooth bead over top of that wire in order to bury it and to make it look seamless. The type of wire I'm using is tinned copper. Now it does come pre-tinned, but you're gonna still need to do your own little bit of tinning to get it to behave the way you want it to. When I'm attaching the wire, I just line up the wire itself with the seam, and I get it as close to the seam as I can. I actually wished I had stopped a little bit short of the soldering on this line so that I could have laid that wire even more flush with the project before I soldered over it with a thick bead, but it worked out fine. All you have to do is really just make sure that you rest your iron on there and melt that metal back down to a flat position, and then make sure your wire is positioned within that metal, deep within the metal. So y'all, I did something stupid and I forgot to record myself beading the outside edge of this project. So what I'm gonna do is show you how I do that, but on a different project. I did record myself last week doing that, so I'm gonna switch to a different project just to show you how I bead the edges of this, and then we'll come back to the pumpkin. So I'm gonna warn you, this part is a little bit tricky, but it really is necessary, not only for the aesthetic, but also for the structure of the piece. It is definitely a dance between heat and movement and gravity and patience, but you got this. So after applying a thin layer of flux to the outside edge of the entire piece, you're gonna start feeding solder along the edge, because you want to create a smooth, rounded bead that hugs the edges a little bit. And so it's adding a little bit of a raised beading even to those areas that we tinned a little while ago. So it's sort of hugging and wrapping around that outer edge. So you would work in sections and just rotate the piece as you go. Be sure to pause long enough for the solder to harden before you move on. And if you notice flat or uneven areas, you can always go back to them. Just don't hang out too long in one area, because if the solder gets too hot, it's just gonna spill over the side. So if things start looking really lumpy, there's probably a need for a little more flux. So just take your time here. It makes such a big difference in the final look. And you can check to see if you need to make any adjustments by holding the piece up in a window and looking at the silhouette. Sometimes you can see lumps and bumps that you could smooth out very easily just by tapping your iron a little bit. So coming back to the pumpkin, the edge has been soldered on this, and what I'm doing here is just cleaning up any little areas on the front that may have been affected while I was beading the edge. It can happen, and it's not a big deal. You can easily go and just touch your iron on some spots that got a little wrinkly or bumpy. Okay friend, now go ahead and unplug that soldering iron. Now that we have finished soldering our piece, yay, it's important that we immediately clean and polish the piece to prevent oxidation and corrosion. There are great cleaners out there such as Quick Clean or CJ's Flux Remover, but you can also use dish soap and water. I like to work up a really good lather using a little brass scrubby sponge. Now, there are multiple types of sponges you can use for this step, and I guarantee you there are other glassers that would tell you you should not use this kind of sponge. However, I have not had any problems. The brass one is a little less abrasive than, say, a stainless steel one. And I run my sponge parallel on those edges to make sure that everything stays nice and sealed. But I've never had any issues. I love these little sponges, so don't judge me, glassers. Then you're gonna rinse your piece and dry it really well. I like to use a microfiber cloth for this to really get in those crevices and dry it out really well. Now it's time to polish. This is a stained glass finishing compound called Clarity, and it's a great product. And it's really just carnauba wax, I think that's how you say it. And you just put a little bit of it on a microfiber or an old t-shirt or something and just spread it very thin on the front, back, and sides of the entire piece. Once the wax has dried to a haze, it's time to buff. And you finally get to reveal that beautiful, shiny glass and metal that you've been dreaming about. I'm using microfiber, but an old t-shirt works really good for this step as well. And once you're done, you can hold it up to the light and see if there's any additional haziness that you may need to buff out. Soft toothbrushes are really handy for getting into tight crevices, so I like to keep one of those nearby as well. I'm always so excited for this final step because this means I'm getting ready to be able to hang up my beautiful artwork. So I opted for a couple of O-rings and a piece of silver chain for this one, and I think it looks pretty sweet. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that there was something informative in this video, that something maybe made you feel a little more confident going into this step. I wish you the absolute best, and if you have any questions, please drop them in the comment section and I will answer them promptly. If you like this video, please hit like and don't forget to subscribe. I'm going to be posting lots and lots more glassy videos in the coming weeks. In my next video, we're going to be talking about black patina and how to achieve rich, dark solder lines. I look forward to seeing you there. Have a great day, guys. Bye.